Andrew Collins had built Patriot Grill from the ground up, acquiring struggling burger joints and transforming them into a beloved regional chain known for fast service and friendly staff. At least that was the brand he had worked so hard to build over the past decade, but recently that image had begun to crack. Reports had started trickling in, then pouring in about one location in particular. Customer complaints about long wait times, incorrect orders, and most concerning of all, the rude behavior of employees were becoming too frequent to ignore. What troubled Andrew most, however, were the whispers of something more serious: mistreatment, even bullying within the staff ranks. These weren't just one-off reviews or occasional customer rants, they were consistent, specific, and disturbing. As CEO, Andrew had made it a point to trust his district managers. Delegation, after all, was essential when running 10 locations spread across 3 states, but with each report, he began to question whether trust had turned into complacency. The district manager overseeing the problem store located just outside of Dallas insisted things were fine. A little turnover, a few new hires learning the ropes, he said over the phone, but Andrew had been in this business long enough to recognize when someone was covering up a deeper problem. He needed answers, and more importantly, he needed the truth, not filtered through reports or spin, but seen with his own eyes. So he made a decision. He would go undercover. The next day, Andrew arrived at the store not as himself, but as Mark Walker, a fictional former warehouse worker trying to start over in food service. He wore thick-rimmed glasses, had dusted his hair with grey, and walked with a slight limp to add authenticity. His uniform didn't quite fit purposefully, and his story was just believable enough: recently laid off, humble, eager to learn, no food service experience. No one asked too many questions, the staff barely glanced at him during the onboarding process, and he was quietly added to the lunch shift as a trainee. He blended in without issue. No one recognized the CEO standing right behind the counter, but from the moment he stepped inside, Andrew felt it in the air. Something was off. The energy was heavy, and not in the usual chaotic way that comes with a lunchtime rush. It was something more subtle, more unsettling. Employees moved quickly, yes, but without spirit. Their eyes rarely met, and their voices were hushed even in the back kitchen. He watched as one customer tapped her foot impatiently at the counter, her growing irritation met with a tired apology and a slow-moving register worker. The fry station was cluttered. The trash bin near the prep area overflowed, and no one, not one employee, smiled. Andrew had walked into dozens of kitchens before, but this one felt cold, like a place where people came not to work, but to survive the day. He kept his head down, quietly studying everything. The team operated like they were under surveillance, and not in a good way. There was no rhythm, no leadership, and certainly no camaraderie. If anything, the workers appeared to be walking on eggshells, tension lingering just under the surface. Andrew noticed how the assistant manager, a man named Brent, barked commands without ever lending a hand. He hovered like a warden, not a mentor pointing at mistakes, but offering no direction. Several workers flinched when he spoke. One teen especially seemed rattled from the moment Andrew arrived. The boy's hands trembled as he struggled to fill a drink order, his eyes darting every time Brent came near. Something deeper was wrong here, and Andrew's gut told him it wasn't just a bad day. By the end of that first hour, Andrew had gathered more than enough reason to continue his cover. He would stay quietly observing, not as the boss who signed checks and reviewed profit margins, but as the man on the line. One of them, he needed to see the patterns, not the exceptions. He needed to understand the culture of this kitchen from the ground up. More importantly, he needed to find out whether this one store was just a fluke or a symptom of a much bigger problem across the company he thought he knew so well, and that meant keeping quiet, working hard, and waiting for the truth to show itself. One shift down. Many more revelations to come. The first real test of Andrew's patience and his restraint came not long after the lunch rush began. Orders started pouring in faster than the small crew could handle, and the already tense atmosphere turned frantic. Employees darted between the grill fryers and register, trying to keep up with the chaos. Ethan, the teenage worker Andrew had noticed earlier, looked especially overwhelmed. With flushed cheeks and trembling hands, the boy loaded up a tray with 2 burgers, a side of fries, and 2 fountain drinks. Andrew, still pretending to be a new hire named Mark, kept his distance but didn't take his eyes off Ethan. He could tell something was about to go wrong. Ethan took a deep breath, balancing the tray with care as he turned toward the front counter. The floor mat near the soda station had curled up at the corner, something Andrew had silently noted as a hazard earlier in the shift. Just as Ethan stepped forward, his foot caught on that mat. Time seemed to slow. One of the drinks tipped, then another. In seconds, a splash of soda drenched the counter, and part of the tray customers turned. Heads swiveled. The restaurant, already buzzing with noise, went quiet, just long enough for the embarrassment to land hard. Brent wasted no time. "Unbelievable," he said loudly, throwing his hands in the air as if this single accident had ruined his entire day. "Are you serious right now?" His voice cut through the restaurant. "You've got the coordination of a toddler, Ethan." The teen froze his eyes wide and face burning red. He dropped to grab napkins, fumbling as he tried to wipe up the mess. Brent didn't stop. He made sure every customer in earshot knew exactly what he thought. "You can't even carry a tray without messing it up. What are you, useless?" The words hung in the air like smoke, choking the energy out of the room. A couple sitting by the window exchanged an uncomfortable glance. A mother shielded her toddler's ears. No one laughed, no one smiled. Andrew felt his chest tighten. He had seen poor management before. He'd seen disorganized teams, lazy supervisors, and even the occasional hothead. But this was something different. This was targeted. Cruel, a public takedown of a kid who clearly lacked the confidence to defend himself. Ethan's hands were still shaking as he tried to mop up the soda, his shoulders hunched in humiliation. Brent, meanwhile, leaned against the counter with smug disapproval, not lifting a finger to help. It wasn't just poor leadership, it was bullying, plain and simple, and Andrew, standing just a few feet away, had to force himself not to break character. Instead, Andrew quietly stepped forward, grabbing a nearby mop. Without saying a word, he began helping Ethan clean the mess. He moved efficiently, not drawing attention to himself, just working beside the boy as if they were equals on the line. "You good, Andrew?" asked softly, keeping his voice low. Ethan gave a slight nod, though his voice cracked when he spoke. "Yeah." Just trying to keep up, Andrew didn't press. He could see the fear in Ethan's eyes, the way he avoided looking at Brent, the way his hands twitched as he worked. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was routine. As the last of the spill was mopped up, Brent barked again from the register, clearly more irritated by the delay than the actual mistake. "Mark, take over here. Maybe you can manage a simple order without screwing it up." Andrew turned to face the customer with a calm, professional tone. "What can I get started for you today?" he said, masking the heat rising in his chest. He caught Ethan in his peripheral vision, still wiping down the counter, still shrinking into himself. That image stuck with Andrew for the rest of the shift, and by the time the dinner crowd began filing in, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a bad moment, it was the culture, and he wasn't going to let it stand. As the shift wore on, Andrew's undercover mission began revealing the layers of dysfunction that plagued the restaurant. What had started as a feeling, a quiet tension in the air, was quickly turning into a clear picture of neglect, fear, and mismanagement. Brent, the manager, didn't manage so much as dominate. He barked commands like a drill sergeant, his voice often louder than the kitchen equipment, but never once did Andrew see him step in to assist. He hovered at the edge of the chaos, arms crossed or leaning against a prep counter, watching others hustle while he offered only criticism. If a burger came out late, he blamed the grill cook. If fries were under-seasoned, he scolded the line staff. Not once did he roll up his sleeves, and the crew, they worked in silence, afraid to ask questions or even make eye contact. There was no system, no rhythm, no support. The kitchen ran like a malfunctioning machine. Ingredients, misplaced stations, disorganized ticket orders, backing up faster than anyone could keep up. The prep fridge beeped a low warning about temperature, but no one moved to fix it. Several utensils were cracked or rusted, and Andrew noticed that the cutting boards were worn dangerously thin. The fry station was particularly troubling. The floor beneath it was slick with oil, and there were no visible signs warning of the hazard. More than once, Andrew caught himself slipping slightly and wondered how the others were managing without injury. The answer came soon enough, and it came at a cost. Ethan was back on the fryers by mid-afternoon, having barely recovered from the earlier incident. Andrew watched him closely, noting how the teen moved faster than he should, constantly glancing over his shoulder to see if Brent was watching. There was no margin for error, not even a second to breathe. Then it happened fast and silent. Ethan reached to lift a basket of freshly cooked fries too quickly. His grip slipped, the handle twisted, and hot oil splashed onto his right wrist. He let out a sharp hiss and instinctively jerked backward, dropping the basket partially into the fryer. A few fries scattered onto the floor, and the boy cradled his wrist, wincing in pain. Brent's reaction was instant and appalling. "Oh, for crying out loud," he shouted across the kitchen. "What now, Ethan? You burn yourself? That's on you. Get back to work. We don't have time for accidents." The cruelty in his tone made Andrew's jaw tighten. There was no concern, no pause to check on the injury, just another opportunity to belittle someone already on the edge. Ethan opened his mouth as if to respond, but closed it quickly. Eyes down. He looked pale. His wrist was already turning pink, the skin angry and raw. Andrew didn't hesitate. "Where's the first aid kit?" he asked sharply. Glancing around one of the line cooks, a man named Carlos nodded toward the back without a word. Andrew moved fast, guiding Ethan toward the supply area. "Let me see it," he said. Ethan tried to protest, saying he was fine, but his voice was tight with pain. Andrew gave him a firm look. "Kid, your wrist is red and swelling. Just let me fix it." Reluctantly, Ethan extended his arm. Andrew found the dusty first aid kit on a shelf, popped it open, and pulled out burn cream and gauze. He worked quickly and gently, trying to minimize the pain. "You get burned often?" he asked. Ethan shrugged, avoiding the question. Andrew frowned. "No gloves." Again, no answer. That said everything. By the time they returned to the kitchen, Brent was waiting with arms crossed and a sneer on his face. "You done playing doctor?" he said. Andrew didn't break stride. He burned himself. He needed first aid, he replied, keeping his voice level. Brent scoffed. "He'll live." That was the final straw in Andrew's mind. The toxic work culture here wasn't just a management issue. It was a safety issue, a human issue. People were scared, unprotected, and demoralized. And now he had witnessed it firsthand. It was no longer a suspicion. It was the truth. And Andrew Collins, CEO of Patriot Grill, had just made a silent promise to himself. No one under his name would be treated this way again. Andrew stood in the back room of the Patriot Grill, kneeling beside a shelf stacked with cleaning supplies, his hands carefully applying burn cream to Ethan's wrist. The boy was doing his best to hide the pain, jaw tight and lips pressed together, but Andrew could feel the tension in him, like a wire pulled too taut. The burn wasn't deep, but it would sting for days. What bothered Andrew more was not the injury itself, but the resignation in Ethan's posture, as if this sort of thing was just another part of the job. "You guys get gloves back here?" Andrew asked, keeping his voice low. Ethan didn't respond at first. Then after a beat he muttered, "Not unless you ask. And even then they say it's not in the budget." Andrew didn't answer. He couldn't. A silence settled between them as he finished wrapping the gauze ceiling in his frustration with each careful fold. This wasn't a minor oversight. It wasn't a one-time failure. It was a culture, a pattern. Andrew had been in hundreds of kitchens across his career, some hectic, some loud, some downright chaotic, but there was always a baseline safety, mutual respect, and some form of leadership. Here none of those things existed. Brent had created an environment where workers were replaceable, where injuries were ignored, and where fear kept people quiet. That was the worst part. Not the mess, not the yelling, not even the physical harm, but the silence, the normalization of abuse. As they walked back into the main kitchen, Carlos, the quiet, middle-aged line cook who had nodded toward the first aid kit earlier, pulled Andrew aside near the prep station. Carlos had a way of speaking without moving much, like a man who had learned to conserve his energy, or perhaps his hope. "You knew?" he asked, voice, low eyes fixed on the grill. "Yeah," Andrew replied. "Just started." Carlos nodded, tossing a burger patty onto the flat top with practiced rhythm. "Word of advice," he said, "don't make too much noise. Brent doesn't like waves." Andrew studied him for a second, then asked the question that had been on his mind since the first hour. "Has anyone ever reported him?" Carlos snorted softly, not looking up. "You think no one's tried?" "Of course we have, but complaints don't go far." He flipped a burger. "Brent's got connections up top district, guys. People who used to work with him before he came here. Nothing ever sticks." Andrew's jaw clenched. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was protectionism, a failing system that shielded bad leaders because they were part of the same old guard. So what, people just deal with it? He asked. Carlos gave a weary shrug. Some quit. Some stay quiet. Some can't afford to leave. That last line sat heavy on Andrew's chest. He thought of Ethan still nursing a burn, still showing up every shift, of Carlos clearly overqualified but stuck on the grill, of the others who barely spoke, who worked with mechanical silence, who had learned that asking questions only got them targeted. This wasn't just one bad manager. This was a workplace broken from the inside out, allowed to rot, because no one at the top had bothered to look past the spreadsheets and sales reports. Andrew had built Patriot Grill to be a place where people could grow, not get ground down. And now he realized it had grown too big for him to see everything. He had lost touch, and Brent had taken full advantage. That night after his shift, Andrew didn't head straight to his hotel like he had planned. Instead, he sat in his car outside the restaurant for nearly an hour, engine off, watching the staff leave one by one. He saw the exhaustion on their faces, the quiet way they said goodbye, the way Ethan kept his wrist tucked close to his body, the way Carlos rubbed the back of his neck like a man permanently sore from carrying too much. Andrew had seen enough, more than enough. This wasn't a case of a bad apple, it was the barrel. And tomorrow he wasn't just going to observe, he was going to push. He needed to see just how deep the rot went before he burned it out for good. The lunch rush hit hard the next day. Orders flooded the screen. The fryer hissed non-stop, and the chatter in the dining room grew louder by the minute. Andrew still in disguise as Mark moved quickly from station to station, taking mental notes. Ethan was back on the fryers, more cautious than before, but still glancing over his shoulder every time Brent passed by. Carlos manned the grill, his usual quiet rhythm interrupted only by Brent's barks of impatience. Andrew knew the moment had come. The crew didn't need more observation. They needed justice, and Brent needed to be held accountable today in front of everyone at precisely 12:43 p.m. Andrew stepped out from behind the counter and stood near the pickup window where Brent was yelling about a missing burger. His hands were steady, his expression unreadable. He slowly reached up, pulled off his plastic name tag, and tucked it into his pocket. Brent didn't notice at first. He was too busy waving a receipt in the air, complaining that someone on the line can't read. But when Andrew said his name, Brent, with a calmness that cut through the noise, the manager turned. "What is it now, Mark? We're in the middle of a lunch rush." The room had begun to shift. The air, once filled with motion, stilled ever so slightly. Andrew took a step forward. "Step into the office," he said. Brent blinked, caught off guard. "What, why?" Andrew's voice didn't change. "Because I said so." There was something in his tone, measured absolute, that stopped Brent mid-sentence. Across the kitchen, Carlos paused. Ethan froze at the fryer. Even the cashier glanced up, unsure of what was happening, but sensing the power dynamic tilting. Then quietly, Andrew removed his glasses, folded them, and slipped them into his apron. Brent squinted. "Wait. What's going on?" he asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. Andrew looked him square in the eye. My name is Andrew Collins. I'm the CEO of Patriot Grill, and I've been working this store undercover for the past 2 days. A ripple of silence spread through the kitchen. Plates paused. Mid-prep customers in the dining room kept eating, oblivious to the unfolding shift behind the scenes, but inside the kitchen the crew stood frozen. Brent's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He stammered. Wait, what? You're serious? Andrew didn't give him room to recover office. Now Brent obeyed, suddenly unsure of his footing, his confidence faltering for the first time. They stepped into the cramped manager's office and shut the door behind them. The noise of the restaurant became muffled. In its place was a new tension, thick and inescapable. Brent stood by the desk, arms crossed his face, caught between defensiveness and disbelief. All right, so you're the boss, what? Now, he asked. Trying to sound unimpressed, Andrew remained by the door no longer. The trainee, but the man who built the company and signed the paychecks. He let the silence hang for a beat, then walked forward slowly. You tell me, Andrew said, because over the last 48 hours I've seen you mock your team in front of customers, ignore injuries, run this kitchen with 0 safety protocols, and break the morale of nearly every employee here. Brent scoffed. It's a fast food joint, man. You're not going to find fine dining etiquette here. This is how it works. Andrew's face hardened. That's an excuse. You're not managing a store. You're managing to destroy people. Brent tried to shift the blame. These kids, they're lazy. If you're not tough on them, they take advantage. I've been doing this for years. You really think I'm the problem? Andrew leaned in slightly, his voice low but powerful. Do I think Ethan burned himself because he's lazy, or because you never gave him gloves and he was too scared to ask? That stopped Brent. Cold. He didn't have a comeback, just a twitch of irritation that quickly shifted back to anger. So what you gonna fire me now? Andrew didn't answer right away. He studied Brent, watching him deflate. Then he nodded. Yes, you're done here. Brent exhaled sharply, masking it with a cynical scoff. Figures Big Shot CEO spends 2 days here and thinks he knows everything. Andrew replied calmly, I know enough. The office door swung open and Andrew stepped back into the kitchen. The clatter of spatulas and fryer baskets had resumed, but the energy was different now, charged with unease. The team had seen Brent follow Andrew into the office with swagger and attitude. Now Brent was gone, and Andrew stood there no longer in disguise, no longer playing the role of trainee. Mark, but fully revealed as the CEO of Patriot Grill. The room fell into a stunned silence. All eyes were on him. Carlos at the grill, Ethan by the fryer, a young cashier watching from behind the POS system. Andrew took a breath, not to steady himself, but to carry weight in his next words. Brent is no longer your manager, he said firmly, letting the statement sink in like thunder rolling through still air. Murmurs broke out immediately, soft, startled, cautious. Carlos turned away from the grill for the first time, blinking as if he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Ethan's jaw dropped slightly, his expression a mix of disbelief and relief. No one clapped, no one cheered. Not yet. They were still trying to figure out if this was real or just another temporary shake-up like they'd seen before, someone from corporate coming in, making bold statements, and then disappearing while nothing really changed. But Andrew wasn't done. From this moment forward, Carlos will serve as interim store lead. He continued, he knows this kitchen better than anyone, and more importantly, he's earned your trust. Carlos looked around slowly, as if to make sure Andrew was actually speaking to him. Me? He asked, wiping his hands on a towel that hung from his apron. Andrew nodded. You've been here 5 years. You've held this place together without recognition, without support. That ends today. The silence shifted. It wasn't disbelief anymore, it was processing. Carlos gave a slow nod, still stunned but standing a little straighter. The rest of the crew looked between Andrew and Carlos, unsure how to react, but the heaviness in the room was starting to lift. For the first time in a long time, something felt different. Something felt possible. Andrew turned toward Ethan, who was still standing near the fryer, his gauze-wrapped wrist resting awkwardly at his side. The boy looked nervous again, unsure if he was about to be singled out or scolded. Instead, Andrew softened his tone. "Ethan, he said you've been through a lot in this kitchen. More than anyone your age should have to deal with." Ethan blinked clearly, "Not expecting that I want to ask you something." Andrew continued. "Are you ready to learn? I mean, really learn. No fear. No yelling. Just the training and support you should have had from day one." Ethan stood a little taller. "Yes, sir," he said. His voice was quiet, but there was something stronger underneath it now. A flicker of belief. Andrew nodded. "Good. Because starting today, that's exactly what you'll get." He looked back at the rest of the team, letting his gaze land on each face. "I know these past few days have been tough. I know trust isn't earned in a single shift, but I'm here to tell you, we're turning the page. We're going to fix what's broken. And that starts with how we treat the people who make this place run." The room stayed quiet, but the stillness wasn't cold anymore. It felt like the air before sunrise, soft, promising, full of change. For the first time, the team wasn't shrinking under pressure, they were leaning into the moment. As Andrew stepped away to let Carlos begin giving new direction, he noticed something subtle. People were moving differently, not faster or louder, but freer. Ethan approached the prep station, asking questions without looking over his shoulder. The cashier smiled at Carlos, who was already walking through the steps of a new inventory checklist. Even the line cooks, who had barely spoken in days, began discussing orders more openly. It wasn't a full transformation, not yet, but the seed had been planted. And Andrew, standing by the kitchen door, realized something that gave him quiet satisfaction. It didn't take a speech or a grand gesture to change a culture. Sometimes it started with simply removing the wrong person and finally giving the right ones a chance. The moment Andrew stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, the weight of the last 2 days finally hit him, not as exhaustion but as urgency. Change couldn't wait until next week or be lost in layers of corporate approval. This wasn't just about fixing a single store, it was about rebuilding a system that had allowed neglect and mistreatment to fester. He pulled out his phone and began making calls right there on the curb outside the restaurant, first to HR, then to his regional operations director, finally to the supply team. "We're not waiting," he told each one firmly. "This store is ground zero for company reform, and I want action now, not memos." By the end of that call marathon, Andrew had laid the groundwork for a rapid overhaul. HR agreed to send a team the following week to conduct anonymous interviews with the crew, giving them a safe channel to report misconduct that may have been swept under the rug for years. The training department began mapping out an emergency schedule, both digital and in-person sessions, focused on everything from kitchen safety to leadership accountability. Meanwhile, the supply chain team placed immediate rush orders: gloves, non-slip mats, updated thermometers, fire-resistant aprons, and new fry baskets were all set to arrive within 48 hours. Andrew also flagged the broken prep fridge, the flickering lights in the walk-in cooler, and the dull, chipped knives, none of which should have been ignored in the first place. Inside the store, Carlos had already begun to step into his new role with a quiet kind of authority. He wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, but his presence brought calm. Instead of barking orders, he asked questions. Instead of commanding from a distance, he worked side by side with the crew. He helped one team member at the grill rearrange the line so that hot trays were no longer being passed across open fryer oil. He showed another how to portion properly, using a scale instead of eyeballing. Ethan shadowed him closely, eyes wide, soaking in everything like a sponge. Andrew watched it all unfold from the office window, and for the first time in days allowed himself a breath of relief. Something real was taking root. By mid-afternoon, the difference was tangible. The staff, once hesitant and tight-lipped, had begun speaking more freely. You could see it in the way they moved. More assured, less rushed. There was less shouting, fewer miscommunications and more collaboration. Ethan approached the prep station with a question instead of waiting to be told what to do. The cashier offered a suggestion on how to speed up lunchtime drink service. Carlos listened and made the change on the spot. Andrew walked through the dining room quietly observing. Customers didn't know the drama that had unfolded behind the scenes, but they felt the shift. Orders came out faster. Faces behind the counter looked less strained. The store felt lighter. Andrew gathered the team near the back exit just before the end of the shift. This isn't just about fixing what was broken, he told them. It's about building something better. He shared a brief overview of the reforms underway, new equipment on the way, training programs launching, and a commitment from him personally to check in weekly until the store was fully stabilized. You deserve to feel safe at work. You deserve to be heard. And from this point on, we're going to earn your trust, not just expect it. No one clapped or cheered, but they listened, they nodded, they believed him. That alone was worth more than applause. As the crew began to clean up for the night, Andrew lingered in the office, jotting down ideas for broader reforms across all 10 Patriot Grill locations. What had happened at this store could be happening elsewhere, he knew that now. But if this small team could recover, if a new leader like Carlos could rise from the grill, and if a teen like Ethan could find confidence again, then the company wasn't broken beyond repair. It just needed hands-on leadership, real accountability, and the courage to act before it was too late. And Andrew Collins, for the first time in a long time, knew exactly what he needed to do next. The next morning, Andrew arrived at the store earlier than usual. The dining room was still dark, the air filled only with the low hum of refrigeration units and the occasional clang of prep trays being stacked. He didn't need to be there yet, but he wanted to be. There was one person he was particularly eager to observe: Ethan. The young worker had been through more than any teenager should in a first job, belittled, burned, and ignored, but Andrew had seen something in him during the last shift. Beneath the nerves and the hesitation was a mind that paid attention, that wanted to learn. And today, Andrew intended to give him that chance. As the opening team began their routine, Ethan quietly stepped into his usual position at the fryer. Andrew stood nearby, arms folded, but expression relaxed. He waited for a lull, then gently approached. "Mind walking me through your fryer process?" he asked casually. Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "You mean like what I do?" Andrew nodded. "Exactly that." There was a pause, then slowly, Ethan straightened his back and began explaining. He pointed to the timer on the screen, described how he checked the oil temperature each morning before loading baskets, how he gave them a quick shake so the fries wouldn't clump, and how he monitored their color as much as the clock. His voice was quiet at first, but steady. Not memorized, understood. Andrew listened carefully, occasionally nodding, sometimes asking follow-ups. "What do you do if the fries come out too dark?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Check the oil temperature. Sometimes it runs hot. I lower it, then toss the batch and reset." There was no guessing, no bluffing. The kid knew his station. He wasn't just going through motions. He was thinking, adjusting, learning in real time. And all of it had been buried under layers of fear and neglect. Andrew could see the difference even in Ethan's body language. No longer shrinking under pressure, he was standing taller, more centered. It was as if being asked to share what he knew gave him permission to believe in what he could do. Carlos had joined them by then, wiping his hands with a rag as he leaned against the nearby prep table. He said nothing at first, just watched Ethan finish the demonstration. Then quietly he said, "He's solid. Always has been. Just needed someone to notice." Andrew glanced at Carlos and nodded. Agreed. The two men stood there for a moment, both seeing the same thing: raw talent, unpolished, but real. Ethan glanced between them, still unsure of what to make of the moment. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked cautiously. Carlos shook his head. "No, kid. You're doing a lot right." The shift continued, but the energy was different. Ethan moved with a little more confidence now. He asked Carlos questions, offered to help another team member with prep, and even double-checked a new batch of oil when he noticed the fryer heat spiking. Andrew watched from the dining area for a while, blending in as just another early customer. And the more he watched, the more he realized how easily good people could be overlooked in a broken system. It wasn't that Ethan had suddenly changed overnight. He had always been capable, he just needed the freedom to show it. And now, with Brent gone and a new culture forming, that door was finally open. By the time the lunch crowd began to trickle in, Ethan was running the fryer station with the ease of someone twice his age. He was calm, alert, efficient. Andrew stepped back into the kitchen. One last time that morning, patted Ethan lightly on the shoulder and said, "You've got real potential." Ethan smiled, small but honest. It wasn't just the compliment that meant something. It was that someone had finally seen him, listened to him, and believed in what he could become. That more than anything was the transformation. And Andrew knew if this store could produce a leader like Carlos and a learner like Ethan, then Patriot Grill still had a future worth fighting for. The following morning, before the first coffee order had been placed and before the fryer hissed to life, the Patriot Grill kitchen was filled with something rare, quiet anticipation. The crew, still adjusting to the previous day's seismic shift, arrived early at Andrew's request. Carlos stood near the prep table, already in position. Ethan wiped down the fry station with focused energy. Others leaned on counters or stood in small clusters, eyes turning toward the man they now knew, not as Mark the trainee, but Andrew Collins, the CEO who had walked their shoes, seen their scars, and stayed long enough to do something about it. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Andrew stepped through the side entrance with a clipboard under one arm and that same calm, steady presence he had carried since the first day undercover. "Thank you all for being here." He began, his voice measured but warm. "I know the last few days have been unusual. Some of you may still be processing what happened. That's okay, but I wanted us to start this morning, not with orders, but with a conversation." He held up the clipboard and continued. "We're going to go around and talk about what's working, what's broken, and what you need from this company to feel safe, supported, and successful." A few eyebrows raised, some glanced at Carlos, others at each other, but no one moved to leave. They were listening. Andrew looked around the room and added, "This isn't a one-time meeting. This is the start of something permanent." One by one, the team spoke. The cashier suggested better communication between shifts. A grill cook mentioned the faulty burner that had gone ignored for weeks. Ethan quietly requested updated training guides and a buddy system for new hires. Carlos, speaking last, asked for something Andrew hadn't expected: regular one-on-one check-ins between staff and leadership, not just when things go wrong, but when things go right. Andrew nodded after each point, jotting everything down. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend, didn't redirect. He just listened. When the last voice had finished, he looked up and said, "All of this matters, and all of this will be addressed." Then he said the words that turned the meeting from hopeful to historic. "This isn't just about this store. What we do here is going to shape what happens at every Patriot Grill location moving forward. I've already started conversations with HR operations and training leads across the region. We're rewriting the script, and it begins here with you." A quiet wave of surprise moved through the team. This wasn't corporate lip service. This was a promise backed by action. For a company that had once felt too distant, too large to care about. The little things, the message was clear. The little things were now everything. As the meeting wrapped up, Andrew didn't make a grand exit. He helped Carlos set up the grill, chatted briefly with the morning shift team, and passed by Ethan, giving him a simple nod of encouragement. He walked out through the front doors like any other morning guest, except this time he wasn't just leaving a restaurant, he was stepping away from a space that had started to heal. The changes were still fresh, the system still fragile, but the spirit was undeniable. What had once been a store, defined by fear and dysfunction, was now rooted in possibility, respect, and growth. Outside, the sky was a little brighter. The air cooler, and the noise of the city felt less heavy than it had the day he arrived. Andrew paused at his car, looked back at the building one last time, and exhaled, not out of exhaustion, but relief. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man trying to control a business from afar. He felt like a leader again, a real one. The kind who listens, the kind who acts, the kind who never lets silence speak louder than the people behind the counter. If this story moved you, imagine how many voices like Ethan's are still waiting to be heard. At Deep Inside HQ, we uncover the hidden truths behind everyday lives, the courage, the failures, the second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose what's broken, celebrate what's possible, and remind us all that real change begins when someone decides to care. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment. We want to hear your voice too.